We just recently got a gift of over 900 books from a wonderful donor in New Jersey. They had all been in storage. They were all gay and lesbian fiction and non-fiction and some great things. And the thing about that affected me so much was the fact I thought, what an incredible gift. They had all been in storage. And so we had them shipped down here by rail. And we've been through them all. And there were about 100 of them that were signed by the authors. And so those went into the locked area and the archives. We now have close to 1,000 signed copies. But the other thing that's interesting about that gift, with 900 books, and if you take the signed ones out, because those all went into the signed area, there were only about 30 books out of the 800 remaining books that we did not have in the library already. And that is a great thing, to be able to say that the library really is so rich that someone could bring to us 900 books, and there were really just a small percentage of them that we didn't have. Now, what do we do? You're back on there, Emery. So what do we do when we get multiple books? We check it out to see what we have on the shelves here. And if the new copy is a better copy, then we keep that, or we redistribute the books. We started a program called the Starter LGBTQ Library Program, and we are now sending out a box of books a week to different places throughout the United States. So if you know of any organization which is interested in getting a library starter package, we'll be more than happy. They're absolutely free. All we ask is that they pay for the postage, and that's a great resource to be able to have. So I guess all of this is for me to just give a bit of a plug and to say, if you do have books that you would like to donate to us, please, we'd love to be able to get them, put them through our process here, and then we're sure to pass them on as well too. So as everybody knows, we have this great library, and of course we have the archives, and we're going to talk about the archives tonight. The archives, we have 2,700 linear feet in the boxes in the archive area, and which totals about 6 million pages. And so just to let people know how we're going to be doing this event tonight, I'm going to be doing a tour of an exhibition which is going to be ending next week, called BLK. And then we just put up a new exhibition in our second gallery space, a small space around the corner there, called First Look. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to post them. I'm going to let Emery, he's going to be looking at them. And so Emery, just shout out to me if you feel like there's a question that feels like a good time. I'm more than happy to have a discussion here about any of the stuff. So feel free to communicate in any way. And so just one last thing, we have been open, even though I see many of you are not from Florida, which is great. Broward County is still one of the crazy spots, although the numbers are getting a little bit better with COVID. But we have been open since the beginning. Well, we've been coming to work here since the beginning of June, and we've been open to the public since July 4th. And we're open to the public right now, 5 days a week. We have a lot of great things in place. We do contact tracing, and we take everybody's temperatures. Everybody has to wear masks. And even if you want to browse the shelves, you're welcome to do that, but you wear gloves when you do that as well. And so people are bringing donations in, they're checking books out, and so it's great. It's actually great to sort of be alive and start creating things and participating. So let's come and take a look at this exhibition. So this is the George Hester Gallery here, and it's a space that we recently just put together. It had been in the space before, it had been covered with books, and so we uncovered the space. And a lot of our curatorial approach over the next year or two is really going to be looking at what we have in our holdings. That is the focus that is most important to us right now. It is so dense, it is so concentrated in gay culture, in art, and in literature, that there's simply, it's got a million different stories here. And so how do we do that, and how do we bring those stories out? So this very first one that we did under this new this new curatorial division, is something called BLK. And BLK, and I don't know if Alan Bell is on this call, but we certainly will send this out to him. He's still alive. He was a publisher of this newspaper. And Emery, just bring it down over here to the case where they can actually see some of the open versions here, open versions of the BLK down here. It was a publication that ran from 1988 to 1992. And by the way, look over here, see RuPaul on the cover over here. I think more than anybody else, RuPaul has been on more covers than more publications than anybody else. And I think we need to do a RuPaul show because she has been everywhere. But this is what the magazine looked like. It had sections, it had classifieds in the back, it had advertising. It had to support itself in that way. But most importantly, it had a lot of content that was designed for the Black, African-American, lesbian, gay, male community. And they published monthly. Their circulation was about 60,000 copies. We have a complete run of this. And they did a great job in trying to bring various issues out that affected the gay community at the time, and also Black writers and thinkers and artists at the same time. So let's start down here at the very end, and the covers are really incredibly powerful. And again, this is printed on newsprint. It averages about 36 pages. And we'll start here with the first one over here, Sylvester. Some of you certainly do remember Sylvester. And it was shortly after Sylvester died of AIDS. This issue came out in 1989. Sylvester lived in San Francisco and unfortunately passed away from complications associated with AIDS, and truly was one of the great disco mavens of the time. And also what's interesting to me is I was thinking back and doing research for another show, there weren't actually that many gay disco stars of the time. And there are many names that we know, but he was really one of the greats. Next, we have a cover, and this is a woman by the name of J apostrophe AI. The title of this piece about her was Lady Sings the Blues, and you can actually find J on YouTube today under the name of Sweet Baby J. She's a wonderful singer. And there was a very interesting interview in this one with a medical expert who the question was asked, what is the state of the healthcare for Black gay men and lesbians in the United States? Talking February 1989. The answer was, Black people tend to have some of the worst health care, superseded only by Native Americans in certain areas. Why is that? Racism. I know you're going to call me a 60s radical, but we got to face the fact that institutional racism skewers many statistics. And again, to read that's written in 1989 about this particular issue, and then we think about the number of Black and brown people who have been disproportionately affected by COVID, it's really incredibly powerful to see that 30 years later, there's virtually no change, that this could have been written by someone exactly today in exactly the same way, with a certain amount of frustration about it. And so as we think about breaking down white supremacy, as we think about Black Lives Matter, it charges us up because it gets to the point to say, wait a minute, when are we gonna make change? If we're not making change now, when are we gonna make change? Are we gonna spend another 30 years and have somebody look at it 30 years after that from today? Are we talking about, 2050 that we're going to be saying the same thing? Anyway, so it's sort of wonderful. It's so illustrative to see these things come out of some of these older publications. There were also, there were some smaller stories on them as well. And this one, for example, the one with Jay on the cover, had a quick question. An issue explored whether certain Black celebrities were circumcised. And they didn't cite any sources for this, but they said that Muhammad Ali, O.J. Simpson, and Billy D. Williams were circumcised, but they were certain that Bill Cosby, Johnny Mathis, and Little Richard were not. Again, I don't know the research. We'll just leave that up to the reporters. Here, the next one, this handsome man is a porn star by the name of Randy Cochran. And there was a great interview with him talking about his life as a porn star and a sex worker. He was very open about it. He was a gay man. He made it very clear that he would have sex with anybody for money, but his preference was to have sex with men. It's very interesting. I don't know if you can see, if you look him up, you can see some great images. He was quite a sex star at the time, but they really made him look like he was, I don't know, he looks like he works at a respectable insurance agency or something there. It's very nice. Let's move along over here to James Baldwin. And again, this is one of the benefits of having a great gay library at the same place. So this was around the time that James Baldwin, this cover was at the time James Baldwin passed away. And the beauty, of course, is that we have all of his books here. And if you're here at the library, guests have come here to the library and actually are able to just take objects off the exhibition wall and check them out. And we've just replaced the ones that have been checked out, and we've added more to it. So it's nice to be able to incorporate the visitor experience here. The interview with Baldwin was really, I again found that to be quite an eye-opening experience. It reminded me of an interview with Gore Vidal, where Gore Vidal never said he was gay. He said he was a homosexualist. He just simply did not want to use the word gay to describe himself. And Baldwin was pretty similar. They were pretty similar as far as generations go. Baldwin was born in 1924, and Gore Vidal was probably born about 10 years earlier, is a guess on my part. If somebody Googles it while you're at home, throw it in the chat so we get that right. But in the interview with him, let me read you this quote from the interview here. Despite his candid treatment of his own sexual orientation, both in his writings and personal life, Baldwin abhorred such labels as homosexual. I love men, Baldwin said, but I am not a homosexual. And gay? I never understood what was meant by that, Baldwin said. Consequently, though never denying his own orientation, he objected to being called either term. Quote, being a faggot was no different than being a nigger for me. In both instances, someone made you other, a thing devoid of human dignity. I was not born to be what someone else said I was. I was not born to be defined by someone else, but I was born to be myself and myself only. Again, as we think about all these labels and everything that we're looking at today, and to hear this proud man who is owning who he is, who refuses to be identified by a label that we all use, and we use very easily on a regular basis, but that he wanted to keep himself distant from that, so that he could be a participant in the way that he wanted to, is really very, it's very profound. This issue was January 1990, and what was interesting for me about this one is that the lead story was job discrimination, and they had done some surveys and they had realized what some of the things were about discrimination against Blacks in the job market. And so some highlights of those surveys were job strength for Blacks that rose in the 1940s had evaporated in the 1950s as more people fought for jobs in post-World War II. And that's an important thing, I think, for us to remember, an important part of the facts, and actually something why this publication is important as well. During the Second World War, of course, a lot of men went to war, and they were busy fighting the war in the 1940s, and also the cleanup that happened afterwards. So there was an opportunity for Blacks to be hired in more places than probably before the war. Of course, there was the great migration that happened to American cities and from the South after the Second World War as well, too. But not to be surprised, when the white American soldiers came back, jobs became available for them, and Blacks who had jobs, many of them had lost their jobs or found that opportunities were not as available for them as they had been during World War II. And I think the other thing that's important to me about this publication, and we'll touch on this in a minute, and again, man, we see this today with regard to the election and things that are going on. In many cases, in the American South and the American Midwest, there was definitely an attempt to keep literacy rates down, because the fear was, of course, that if people were literate, they would be able to communicate with each other. And that's why publications like this are so important, because it was an attempt to circumvent those rules that governments were putting in place that would deny people the opportunity to actually learn about themselves and their communities, and to share that with others in their community as well. And it's something that we can't forget. And today, when we see, you know, craziness, everything from what's happening to the post office to what they're doing to mail-in voting and absentee voting, it's an indication of what is happening with regard with trying to suppress the vote for certain individuals. All right, moving on to mid-1990, here we have a cover story with the wonderful writer, Barbara Smith, who is alive and well, and we're in discussions with her right now about being part of our virtual series. And just as an aside, if this is your first Stonewall event, I want to say, be sure to sign up for our newsletter. You can do that through our website at stonewall-museum.org. And each week we do, in addition to what we're doing tonight, we do a virtual talk with a gay artist or writer. And so you can find out that information by getting on our newsletter, and you can see that. So Barbara Smith, just some quotes. She was born in 1946, and some excerpts from the interview with Barbara Smith. And just as an aside, there's a great story in here about the early part of the Radical Fairies when they were available. And it's an interesting article because it addresses the question, are the Radical Fairies, were they primarily a white group versus a black group, and how were different communities accepted within the gay communities? Were they accepted within that particular community? And in some ways, if you think, there's an analogy that can be drawn about those differences and similarities when you think about what happened to the Michigan Women's Music Festival and how they dealt with individuals who were born female presenting vis-a-vis those who might have transitioned later in their lives. That those that want to be able to be accepting to certain groups sometimes found themselves at conflict with other members of the group. Anyway, with Barbara Smith, this was at a time where she was finishing up her education, and she was taking doctorate studies, and she stopped her doctorate work. And the question was asked of her, did you get your PhD, your doctorate? And she said, no, I did not complete my doctorate. I just couldn't have a bunch of white males who haven't read any of the books that I thought were important telling me what to say and why. She then went on to say, I think the responsibility of Black, lesbian, and gay writers is to tell the truth. I think that Black American writing has always been an inherently political function One of the reasons being that literacy has been denied to us so early and has been against the law. So it's been an active resistance for us to achieve literacy and to write something down and to tell the truth about our experiences. Again, the same point we were speaking about a moment ago. And then, of course, the beautiful poet Audre Lorde was on the cover in fall of 1970. And again, you see another example where guests here at the library are able to take out books about Audre Lorde. When asked to describe herself, she said, "I'm a Black lesbian, feminist, warrior, and poet, and mother doing my work." Any African American who is not consistently critical of everything done in her or his name has to have her head examined. I think that a gay man or lesbian who wants to go into the military should have the right, but I'll do my damnedest to try to persuade her or him not to. My son is in the Navy, she said, and I respect his choice, but I don't believe in the military. We all have to choose our battles. Following year in 91, there was a great article about Clora's and Wendy's and about the gay community in South Africa. And what was interesting to me about that was the quote, the cover story reported the experience of being young, Black, and gay in South America. And when the question was asked about whether or not they went to any of the gay bars at the time, "Oh, I never go to those so-called gay places. Man, they're too full of Wendy's for a Clora to feel okay." And again, it's how people describe themselves and the way that within a group of others that they were able to feel comfortable or not in that particular area. And also, interestingly in this one, I had kind of forgotten about this. This one also had the launch of Queer Knit Nation, which I think many of us are familiar with, but also Arsenio Hall. Some of you may remember his late night talk show, and he had one on during the day. And he was called out for a long-standing history of using homophobic stereotypes in his humor and his sketches, his comedy sketches. And apparently a group of demonstrators made themselves known at the taping of one of his shows, and he got very upset and yelled at the demonstrators that they should get their own show if they didn't like what he was saying, which of course, to me, that sounds like a meaningless gesture. And he said the reason why he didn't discuss gay people on his show is that there are a lot of gay guests on the show, but it ain't none of your damn business that they're gay. Again, what we're talking about here is the idea that there was a complicit sense within the entertainment industry that those who were gay, if they came out as gay, and this is still true for many people today, if they come out as gay, it will be harmful to the financial value of their career. And that becomes problematic. A little bit further, there was a wonderful piece, a wonderful issue where they did, they had an article about tax hints to save you money, questions about whether or not you could deduct your liver. It's, you know, a great, great story for the time in 1991, and they answered all the questions honestly and in a very straightforward manner. But then, importantly to me was the fact that there was an analysis of a letter that Huey Newton wrote on gay rights in 1971. I'm sorry, 1970. It was an open letter that he wrote to other Black Panthers about what their position should be on gays and the fact that gays were coming out. I remember the Stonewall riots happened in 1969, and the first gay pride, it was then called the Christopher Street Parade in New York, was in 1970. So clearly this was happening at a time in which people, if you paid any attention, you could see that the gay movement was out there. And it was probably taking up some energy and space with the feminist movement and with the Black Panther movement and other movements by people of color. So he felt compelled to write this letter to his brothers at the time. Whatever your personal opinions and insecurities about homosexuality and various liberation movements among homosexual and women, you should try to unite with them in a revolutionary fashion. We very well know that sometimes our first instinct is to want to hit a homosexual in the mouth and want a woman to be quiet. But we must gain security in ourselves and therefore have respect and feelings for all oppressed people. And I know through reading and through my life experience, my observations, that homosexuals are not given freedom and liberty by anyone in the society. Maybe they just might be the most oppressed people in society. And what made them homosexual? Some people say that it's the decadence of capitalism. I don't know if this is the case. I rather doubt it. But whatever the case is, we must know that homosexuality is a fact that exists, and we must understand it in its purest form. That is, a person should have the freedom to use his body in whatever way he wants to. We should be willing to discuss the insecurities that many people have about homosexuality. When I say insecurities, I mean the fear that there's some kind of threat to our manhood. We must always handle social forces in the most appropriate manner, and this is really a significant part of the population, both women and the growing number of homosexuals that we have to deal with. So you can see how he's wrestling with this. He's trying to create civil rights for everybody here. But it is, in my way of reading this, it's impossible not to see the sexism implicit in what he had to say. But he at least had an open mind of knowing his position of power and trying to get his brothers, as he saw them, to be open to those who were interested in seeing their rights advanced. Maybe we'll do two more and then we'll go into the other room and take a look at some of those. This one, in 1991, high risk, low priority AIDS in the Black gay community. Of course, this could be covered today. And it was really looking at the fact that young gay Black men were disproportionately coming down with HIV and being infected by it. They point out that while Blacks made up only 12% of the population, 29% of those with AIDS were Black. And in 1982, the number of Black women with HIV was more than twice the number of white women. And so, as you can see in this cover, there's a Black hand on one side and a white hand on the other side with these two guns. And it presents a very powerful image of the danger that many Black men felt at that time, which is how safe are they in the streets? How safe are our younger Black gay brothers with regard to HIV infection? There's very interesting analysis about the fact that many felt that the public health messages at the time were completely ineffective for young Black gay men, and that they were focused more about the white gay liberation movements, and they were loaded with negative messages that simply they weren't reaching the individuals involved. Again, this remains a problem today. And finally, just because I think they're so adorable, and I'm pretty sure I saw them in Boston, I just want to give a shout out to young, gifted, and fierce postmodern African-American homosexuals that operated under the name of Pomo Afro Homos. There were three members of the group, Dejola Branner, Brian Freeman, and Eric Gupton. And Bernard Branner, by the way, is is the vice president of student affairs at Hampshire College. And we're trying to reach him because it would be great to be able, and also he teaches theater studies there as well too. But they talked about, in this issue, they talked about how they were trying to get this fierce mentality out to younger gay men. And it's a wonderful interview with them. And also in this issue, the articles were not particularly long, but they were somewhat poignant about the idea that there is a very interesting story about an analysis of Donna Summer's failed attempt to rehabilitate her career after calling all gay men sinners and claiming that AIDS was a divine ruling. Given how much her career was tied to gay men in the music industry, it presented an interesting fulcrum. And also what was interesting in this article was an analysis of some of the young men and a tribute to some of the young men who had been murdered by Jeffrey Dahmer. Some of you may remember that whole incident where he would murder in a very horrific way young Black men. So let's take a look around. This show, if those of you who are here in Florida, this show will be up until next week, until the end of next weekend. If you'd like to see any of the wall text here or any of these images, I believe the entire exhibition is loaded on our website. I'm looking at Emery here. Yes, so the entire exhibition is up there on our website. And so you can see all of the wall text that's there. And so on this wall, we're just getting ready right now. This show will come down. As I said, the end of next week, we'll go dark in this space for a week. And then we have not yet decided on the title. I am like my own worst enemy right now. But the next exhibition that we're doing, Emery and I are both working on it. It is elected women officials and primarily lesbian and transgender women. And so it's a look at people who have been elected and leaders who have been elected going back to 1972. And all of that will be coming out of our archives as well. We have a lot of great pieces that we have pulled out. And it tells an amazing story about how women, and particularly lesbians, have played an important part of the American political system. And they have been at the forefront of providing opportunities for, women have been at the forefront of providing opportunities for LGBTQ elected officials. So let's stroll over to the Ross Gallery. I don't mean to give you my back here. I'll walk backwards, how's that? Thank you. Can I grab my glass of water? Thank you. So as some of you know, we had another location in Wilton Drive, and we made the decision last December that we were going to be consolidated under one roof. And so here we are in the library. So we created that space over there, which is the Hester Gallery, and that will expand as we go along. And then we created this space that long time ago was a gallery. We found that it was here. And so come on in. So this is the Charles Ross Gallery. It's a very intimate space. It's a great space to show small pieces. And this is a show called First Look. And it's a bit of a personal view of mine that as the new director here, I can't believe it's almost a year, but as the new director here, I wanted to be able to show people some of the things that I found in my first pass at the archives. And I have to say, it truly, all cliches aside, it is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, every time I go in here now, and for those of you who've not been here, I'm gonna put, Emery, let's pull them back there at the end after we do this. But it's really just, it's just the first pass, the first opportunity. And I can't really describe why these are more important than other things. But what I'm trying to do is get out into the public the things that are really important. So let's start over here to my right. And this is, we have private collections of probably about 150 different individuals. This is one of the most significant ones that we have. It's by an individual by the name of Joel Starkey. He died of AIDS, and we're going to do an entire exhibition about Joel Starkey in 2021. And he was just a fascinating character. Unfortunately, he passed away before I had an opportunity to know him. Last name is spelled Starkey, S-T-A-R-K-E-Y. And he lived here in South Florida, lived in Boca Raton. And he was basically, well, he was many things. He was a publisher. He was a correspondent with indigent LGBTQ people in jail. He was a feminist. He was actually one of the first board members of the National Organization for Women. And he was also an activist where he was the first individual who sued his insurance company for the insurance company not providing him with treatment for HIV and AIDS. But a lot of what we have here at the Stonewall Library relating to Joel Starkey is we have all of his papers. So we have all of his correspondence with regard to the AIDS activism. We have all of his correspondence with regard to his time on the NOW board in the 1970s. We have all of his socialist publications that he had. But what I'm getting at here is his role as a publisher. So this gentleman created in 1971 his own gay newspaper. And what he did, and as Emery was showing you, what you're looking at right here are what I would call the mechanicals. So he would actually take newspaper articles, and what you're looking at is just, he would tape them or he would glue them down to these pieces of paper, and then he would photostat them. And he created a 2 or 3 page newsletter. And here's a copy. So the newsletter was called the Southern Gay Liberator. And what he did is he mailed it to every gay publication he could find with the idea that they would then send him their publication. And so then he did this for 30 years until his death. And as a result, we have huge troves of original periodicals, particularly having to do with the American South, that no other collection has, because all of his records came here upon his death. So he was so smart to create this publication. And his publication, he would just clip articles from the newspapers. He would take other lists of gay resources. And we have and all of his correspondence, everybody who wrote to him, he placed little ads in local newspapers and say, if you want to join the gay with the civil liberties, and it's not Gay Liberation Front, but the Gay Liberators, sorry, that you could join that, and you would be able to you'd be able to get a copy of it. And I think he asked $2 for it or something. Well, we have all the correspondence. What's so charming about some of this correspondence, of course, is many people were desperate for the communication. But they, of course, and many of them, they said, you can't disclose my name to anybody, because they didn't want to be outed in any particular way. And then some of them would write with caveats on it saying, well, as long as you're the right kind of gay. And I haven't quite figured out what they mean by that. But again, it was a sense of self that was probably negative in some way. And so they had to be able to put it in that right context. And of course, there's no wrong answer for it. It's just the fact that this was the situation that they found themselves in. So if you turn around completely, right here, you see the mayor of Fort Lauderdale, Dean Trantalis. And part of what we have in the archive that I was not aware of before is we have a huge trove of oral histories and interviews with gay leaders over the years. And we are in the process now of creating more of those. And these are going to be archived and be placed on our website. And so if you have anybody that you think is interested in adding more information to this, it's something that we would be interested in talking to you about. But this is a major part of what's in there. Now, of course, all of this work and all of these interviews, transcripts have to be made of these, and then they have to be searchable. But it's a wonderful way for us to be able to record the history and to be able to move through it. This case has got two separate things going on here, and they are connected, but in another way they're not connected. Over here on the left, you see 12 files right here. And what this is showing you is that these are 12 out of the 3,000 subject matter files that we have on the other side of the wall over here. And we just pulled out a bunch of them. I don't know why, but here you have Dignity Fort Lauderdale, Dignity Miami, Dignity Los Angeles, Dignity Richmond, Virginia, Dignity San Diego, Dignity USA Journal, then it goes to Dilettantes, Dimensions, Directions for Gay Men, Directories of Business Services, and Directory of Homosexual Organizations and Associations. So when pieces come into the archive, basically whatever the subject matter is, they get filed. We have wonderful volunteers that file them by these particular subjects. They get cataloged in the system, and then as I said, there are 3,000 of these titles. We just opened up a new one, I think, probably a month or two ago on the topic of pandemic and the way how the pandemic has affected gay people. On the other side of this case, we had regional guides. And these are the things that I think about it, maybe 20 years ago, that if you were in a different city, you would find on the top of a cigarette machine, and you would go and you'd get this publication. On the right here, where it's at is New York's Weekly Guide, and this one is from 1975. And look, there's RuPaul again. I'm telling you, we got to do a show about RuPaul. She's everywhere. And here you see one from Detroit, and here's one called Data Boy, which was from California. And then there's a whole collection of them. So we have thousands of these from different topics. And again, I'll do a shout out for the organization to the extent that you think and you have any of these kind of things in your boxes. Please, please, please don't throw them away. Give them to us. Let us throw them away. Let us find out whether or not we have them, because it may be the only copy that exists. Sticking with the theme of access to the gay community, here is, many of you might remember if you're of a certain age, here's a collection of Bob Damonns Guides. And for many, particularly for gay men, Bob Damonns Guides were really sort of the be-all and the end-all. Interestingly, if you look here in 1970, which is one of the earliest ones, and even here in 75 and here in 76, and it went under the name of the Bob Damonns address book, the word gay does not appear anywhere on those. You had to know that it was a guide. And it's basically just a listing inside of restaurants and bars and places that you can actually go to. And then he put a listing here, which I find to be difficult to follow. But if it had a star, it meant it was very popular. If it had a B, it meant blacks predominate. You could bring your own bottle. There was dancing. There were some with girls. If it had an RT, it meant that raunchy types, usually downtown type establishments, can mean rent or commercial. And then young and or collegiate types. And so it was a way of actually communicating with the gay community at the time. You could pick these things up probably in a dirty bookstore. You weren't going to find them at your local grocery store, but bookstore, but you could find them at an adult bookstore. And then starting in the mid 1970s, he started listing cruisy areas, and he would rate the cruisy areas where gay men could go outside and meet each other for intimate and sexual encounters. And he would talk about one being more dangerous or safer than the other. Bob Damonn was a salesman, and so he traveled the country a lot, so he researched a lot of this himself. But then he also would take notes from readers and use them to update the guides as well. He then moved over to women's travel guides, as you can see here. But then we found the Gaia Guide from 1976 from San Francisco, which is actually international. And the Gaia Guide is really is not part of the Damonns series, but it was a guide that was meant exclusively for women, the exact same thing. Bob Damonn had passed away, died of AIDS in 1991, I believe, and now a very charming lesbian owns the business on the other side of a paywall. It still exists out there. This is what the New York Times called the Black Book of gay men's life. So up here, I wanted to point out the amount of lesbian publications that we have here. And this is just the tiniest of drops in the bucket. We certainly do have a lot of gay male publications here, but as far as sort of the non-erotic stuff, the lesbian and feminist publications are really incredibly rich. It's no secret that men have objectified women for many years, and then gay men turned around and objectified other gay men. And that still goes on today, and that's a fact of life. But what's fascinating is with a lot of these lesbian publications, it was certainly not about objectification. It was about building a community, and it was about sharing art and sharing connections with each other. So some of these publications are just typewritten sheets of people's phone numbers. They're just places that you can come in contact with somebody to have a cup of coffee. And then there's poetry, and then there is fiction, and there are reviews, and there's activism. And so they're far deeper than many of the publications that were designed for men. No surprise, I guess. So let's come down over here and look at this case. This was a bit of a surprise to me in the sense I hadn't really thought about scrapbooks and why we would have so many scrapbooks, but we probably have somewhere between 50 and 75 different scrapbooks that have been made by individual makers. And here I wanted to show you three different things, or three different variations of them. This first one, all the way over to the left, we don't know who made them, but you can see here there's a Play Guy and a Mr. Berlin and then a Mike Branson. So I'm assuming this was a man who put these together. What he did is he collected every porn magazine he could possibly find, and he created these. Can you just pull the camera over here and just, and he created these bound versions of the individual that was of interest to him, creating his own scrapbook about that individual. By this person alone, I bet we probably have 75 different of these books that he has created about him. And again, we don't even know who he is. Those boxes were brought to us, and the person who brought them to us was cleaning at a house. They didn't know what to do with them. And I find them to be just so incredibly fascinating that somebody was so obsessed with what was going on here and wanted to be able to see, or wanted to be able to save them. In the center here, you see some scrapbooks, and the middle is truly a scrapbook as we think about that. But then the others are like date books. And he would use these date books to create scrapbooks with. But he had a different obsession. In this case, he loved the female movie stars of the 1940s. And so the one in the center here is one that he created about Sonia Henning, the ice skating star of the 1940s. He was also a huge Betty Grable fan. There are 2 or 3 Betty Grable ones down here as well as his Judy Garland one. And the reason why that one is not open is simply because it's so sensitive to light that we don't want to expose that one. But again, this is part of the history that is going on with these scrapbooks. And then over here is something completely different, which these books are put together by a group called the Everglade Rawhides. And so you can, if you pull down here, Emery, you can show them that these are just photo albums. And so the photo albums are filled with 5x7 photographs of this group of gay men who got together for President's Day or Lincoln's birthday or whatever it was. They would have a party around a pool. They would almost always be naked, and they would just take a lot of pictures of themselves and each other. And they were, you know, there's not a lot of action going on in these things. There's just a lot of men hanging around without clothes on, who were just happy about the camaraderie and spirit that they found with each other. We do keep them closed, quite frankly, because we are funded by the county, but if somebody wants to come in here to see them sometime, we're more than happy to have people go through them. And then up here on the wall, sorry, I don't need to interrupt, but so in publications, we have over 300 titles in individual publications in the archives. And this, I just wanted to give, this is just, as I said before, just a drop in the bucket with regard to the diversity of what we actually have. So here we have a publication from 1989. We have a run of this. It's called Charon Rising. And this is primarily for men who were fans of older men. Next to that is a publication called Chrysalis, which Adrian Rich was an editor of that, and is a wonderful literary magazine for women. Here is Florida Gay Live. This is their first anniversary issue. And I don't know if you can see it, but you can see Anita Bryant here with a Band-Aid across her mouth. They spent a lot of time in those days going after Anita Bryant. TVTS Tapestry had several names, and this was one of the more prominent publications for the transgender community. Very interesting, lots of how-to articles, lots of self-improvement articles, ways for people to meet each other. And what was interesting is if you got a subscription to this, you also got a free classified ad in the back. So it was a guaranteed network to meet with people. But they were incredibly strict and clear about it, that they did not want their classified section to be a section where it was about hooking up and sex. What they wanted to do was have an opportunity for people to meet the people who they were. And so their rules were very strict. You could not have any sexual content in your classified ads. You could talk about who you were, and somebody could send a letter at 1983. Yep. And again, it's astonishing. So there's a huge trove of these. We have a lot of comic books as well too. This happens to be a British one called Bosom Buddies, and this is a lesbian one. The gay male erotica, I mentioned that earlier. There's a lot of that here. And for me, I've kind of put the gay male erotica in 2 categories. A magazine like Honcho, I find interesting because it is reflecting a culture of a particular time. There are ads in there, there's stories in there, there's input in there, there is thought in there. Clearly, it does have a a piece of erotica in there, and I think that was probably an influence for people. I can't read that for 1 second though. And so we put that in one category, and then there's another category where they're just straight up erotic photos without any content, and those are just not that interesting to us. What's more interesting is being able to trace what the community was going on at that particular time. It's almost like saying, you know, the old cliche about people, you know, back in the 80s read Playboy for the articles as opposed to the pictures. But that's kind of what we're doing at this point. We're trying to mine the cultural impact out of these publications at the time. And then, you know, so you can go to Honcho, and you can go here to the Journal of the Policy Institute of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force and the Institute for Gay and Lesbian Strategic Studies. And here they did a whole study in 1983 on the myth of affluence among gay, lesbian, and bisexual Americans. And of course, it's so interesting to think that someone would actually take that topic on and study it. And of course, it was well researched, and it was again just trying to disclose the truth there. And then finally, just because it's so much more relevant now, Gay Family is a publication that has been coming out for about 10 years or so. So Emery, before we move, why don't you give me a few of these questions and see if you can just, before we go into so just paraphrase the quick questions. So.
Well, Justin wanted to know, Justin Tsoki asks, the topical subjects on LGBTQ rights and are now trans issues. What's our plan for collecting trans materials that history is being made today? Good
question. So what is Stonewall's plan for collecting trans material? It's the same plan that we have for collecting all the holes that we have within our archives. As I said before, a lot of what we have in our collection has come over the transom. And now what we're doing is we're working very hard to find out two things. We want to know what we have, and then we want to know what's available. And then our goal is to find the places where we have the biggest weaknesses and then try to bring those two things together. Now, one of the ways that we're doing that is we have started a project. It's the first phase of a digitization project that we have been paying a researcher the last 2 months now, where he is literally going through every title and finding the online digital access that already exists for that title. And then we're tying it back to the run that we have for that particular title. So sticking with the trans community for 1 minute, we have found that there's certain runs of some publications that we have that are broader than what some other trans repositories have. So what I'm trying to do is bring us together so that we can actually share all of this information together. It's a way of just coalescing all the information. And also, we're not going to go after getting particular pieces if they're already digitized and they're out there. We will send them to those other places as long as we know that they're safe places. So Stonewall ends up being a hub for bringing a lot of this information together. I think I just saw a good question pop up about African Americans, and that's absolutely right. It's the same thing. It's where showing the fact about BLK and bringing that particular publication to the forefront. But in the research for that, we have now found that there are many other publications out there that we don't have in our collection. And so now the research will begin to be able to identify those titles, see if they exist online already, or for us to be able to acquire runs of those particular titles. One of the things that's sort of interesting about this business is when you look at some of these things, you immediately see just like anybody studying, you know, drawings from the 15th century, this stuff wasn't meant to last this long. A lot of these things are printed on very inexpensive newspaper. I opened up a box of, it was either Washington Blade or the Gay Community News from the 1970s. I immediately had to put the top back on because the first piece I touched, the paper just came out of my hand. And so it's not because of the environment in which it's being kept in, it's more the fact that they were not meant to last this long. And then we know nothing about the version that we actually have of those particular things. And so from a digitization standpoint, one of the things that I want to be able to do are those that we know there's no digital record of, and we know the paper is bad. We want to get those digitized first before another decade goes by and more damage actually comes to them. Other good questions, Emery?
How are we approaching acquiring material from Latinx, brown, and Cuban communities in Florida?
Same thing, and we need to reach out to those communities in the same way. I would tell you, I do not believe that we have a lot of Latinx material and Cuban material, but again, we haven't done the research that can allow us to be able to make those asks in order to be able to do it. But if I were to put things on a hierarchy, I probably would have said in my first pass that we would have been weaker in a gender, in a male-female way, and that we also would have been weak in a white versus non-white way. I'm not 100% convinced of this yet, but I do think we're better in the male-female realm than I thought we were going to be. But I will readily admit that we have lots more work to do in the race area. And I think it's not an impossible thing to put together. The question is, what are the titles? And then who are the individuals that we're going to get to help us, and acquisition funds. I mean, I have to say, I think from a grant writing standpoint, we've had a lot of interest recently. I don't want to jinx us, but we've had interest in getting assistance in acquisition funds for us to be able to balance these good collections that we have. And I'm just very happy that it's work that we can actually make this happen. I would also say, if someone were to say to me, what do we have that would be addressing the Native American population in the United States, I'd say very little in the United States or Canada. And also I think as far as the Asian communities as well too. It's all work that will be done. And the thing is that what we do find is that we find some of those things in the male erotica section. And that's not enough, obviously, because in many cases, what those are just further objectification that's going on from one race to another race. What we're looking for is the cultural impact that's available in the gay community in those areas. So that is my first look. And so for those of you who are, have never been here, Emery's walking backwards. And so thank you, Emery, you're doing well. We're going to take you into the archives. Let me flip around over here for you. So as I said before, this is where we have 2,700 linear feet, 6 million pages of material. And let me just, this bank of, these are all movable shelves. They have hundreds of pounds on each one. These are like the things you would see in any library or big doctor's office or hospital. So come on over here. And so for example, well, just where we are in the G's. So here's GQ Gentleman's Quarterly from 1976 to 1988. So an entire backlog here. And then, so we were talking about the guides out there. So here is something called the Guide, 2003. And so this is a Florida guide, and every copy of it is kept here. So this would fall into that category. Then let's see if we can just get some other titles over here. So, okay, Lesbian Tide is just because these are all alphabetically done here. So this is Lesbian Tide, and 35 cents. One thing, by the way, if anybody is out there and involved in publications, this becomes totally crazy to us. You wouldn't believe how many people print publications and don't put the year on them. And so this is May 1935. And usually what we look for, if they don't put the name on it, there's a copyright date. And this one does not have a copyright date on it. But I bet so we actually spend time looking at the ads. And if it says like Saturday, June 6th, we would then have to research to find out what year this individual publication is. But please, if you're involved in a publication, please put the year on it, because there are people like us years later who are trying to figure it out. So Emery, did you see any years on any of this? So in the box is actually listed 1972. So I imagine that these go back to that.
Those are the earliest.
So those go back to that time. But I'm telling you, looking at this publication right now, I do not see a date in this publication, which I find to be charming in a way. So let me give this back to you, Emery. You know, and so I don't know what else to show you, in the sense that you know, the male figure, the logger. So the logger. Let's swap these out for a second here. Thank you. And tide goes back over here. So the logger is the newsletter of the Broward County Log Cabin Association. So again, it is, you can go from the logger to Lesbian Tide to whatever else you find from an age standpoint. So now what we're doing, and those questions that have been asked about what are we doing about bringing in other constituencies, again, it's really beginning to understand what is it that we have. They have been cataloged and they have been sorted, but now they have to be digested. So we have to understand, as I keep saying, what are the holes that we have and how can we go about bringing them in? Other questions? Take a look, see if there are other questions. No? No? Let's turn around just for a moment. And I just want to, let's back up here. And just to turn around over here, I was talking about the lateral files. Let's go here, and this will just give you a sense of the lateral files and what are going on here. And so again, you can see just as things come over the transom, that they are stored. So this entire bank in the center of the archive are where the lateral files are. So we can keep on going down here. And that first bank that we looked at of shelves over there were mostly the periodicals. And then over here, let me just turn us around. These are the individual archives, individual papers. So James Sears, and then there's subject folders in here. So here we have James Oberfels from the Supreme Court decision. Here is his pride flag. manuscripts by Jack and videos by Jack Nichols. Many of you are familiar with him. Boxes of scrapbooks back here. Files on Glisten, files on gays in the military. So these are all subject matter files or individual collections of papers. And just going back here, so for example, right here is there's an entire wall of documents and materials about Anita Bryant. Everything from every book that was involved to interviews, different films that were made, to books about her, a complete trove. Even right here are, if anybody needed Anita Bryant's Christmas album, here it is. And so it's Anita Bryant's greatest hits. So it's just, an amazing assortment of things depending upon the subject matter. One thing to say too, and there's a whole other bank here of shelves that are coming in, or shelves that were just put in and will be spreading out more here, is also for those of you who are interested in seeing more of a dive into the archives. We recently have been scheduled as a experience through Airbnb. And so we've been doing, are they an hour long? Yeah, so they're an hour long, and you can find out from our website or through Airbnb as well too. This little walkthrough was free, but I think it's $10 per person. Right. And you will actually have a guided tour that you can see at home, on your screen at home, and to see a walkthrough of items here in the archives as well.
You can do that with a group of friends or a private group.
Yeah, so Emery just said you can do it with a group of friends, or we do one person, however many people you want to put together in order to do it. Okay. So I kind of feel like that's what I have at this point. Other questions or comments, or no questions, or nothing else there? Good. All right. Well, keep on sending all of the wait. No. Oh, okay. Keep on sending all of your good wishes our way. We are going to be having our first virtual fundraiser. It'll be in the middle of October. We have another planning meeting on that tomorrow, and so that will be our fall fundraiser that will be happening. You've gotten to see 2 of our exhibitions here, as well as a tour of the archives. And as I say, the next exhibition will be about elected female politicians. And so we're very much looking forward to that. But go to the website, and also in the website as well too, that's where you're going to be able to see the titles of the publications by class in those different publications in those different areas. You'll be able to start seeing the other digital archives of those as well. And and also just don't throw anything away. It's best to send it to us. Let us decide if we need it. If you just ran across, you have a complete run of The Advocate or After Dark or something like that, call us up if it's too many boxes before you ship it, to give us some idea of what's there. But other than that, if you just have stuff, just send it to us and let us make the decision. If it's books, we give them away to other areas. And also, if it's a complete run of a local newspaper, let's say from Oklahoma, we might contact an LGBTQ archive there and ask them if they would like a copy of it. We probably would want to keep a digital copy of it, but if it's not within the geographic scope of South Florida, or the southeastern United States, I should say, technically, we really focus on east of Houston and south of Washington, D.C., but we really do create these runs and have these runs from all over the United States. And, you know, I'm loath to give anything up. So it's, you know, I would hang on to them, but definitely it's better to let us process them. So send us an email and let us know if you have any questions. So thanks for your time.